everyone, and welcome to another episode of HiX-Men Report. We're Hickman 4 gathered today to talk about House of X issue 4. Joining me from all the way from all over the world, Zach, Tyler, and Peter. How are you all doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be back again.
Thank you so much for coming to be back. And this is going to be an interesting episode because we're gonna see. So, without further ado, let's get the show on the road. Peter, get us started.
Oh, well, we're jumping right in today into some major Hickman chartage. There's a chart page before the story even starts, and it's a chart page that has the sad history of mutant extinction and also maybe a little bit of controversy, maybe a little bit of shade. So why don't we start with Faria's reaction to this chart?
Well, before we even get to the chart, let's start with the title.
That's true. Yeah,
because
that's
a
significant title.
I think there is some significance here because this issue is called It Will Be Done, and the subtitle is The House of Xavier and the Way We Treat Our Children. So with that in mind, let's hear some reactions to that chart.
So I felt like the chart, when I read it, the chart kind of set the mood for me in a way, because I was looking at, and the thing they would say, look what they have done. At first, instantly I thought about that Hickman is throwing shades at all previous Marvel writers. It's like, look what they have done. They have cut X-Men in half again and again and again, and how terribly they have been treated. And so as a data-driven person, given being an engineer, data-driven person, I looked at the data, I'm like, oh yeah, look what they have done. So Hickman got me with that. And the one that really stood out for me, Wanda Maximoff, the Avengers. He threw Avengers under the bus as well. It's like as if Wanda Maximoff as a part of Avengers have done this, which was not necessarily the case. And then I was also thinking, I'm like, isn't she a mutant? But then I heard she's no longer a mutant, and I have questions about that. So kind of like my initial reaction. Zach?
So, you seized on the Wanda Maximoff line, and that is definitely the line that I think everybody else reacting to this seized on as well. And, she's referred to specifically in the text as mutant erasure by the pretender Wanda Maximoff, which is quite a phrase. And I feel like the first thing that we really have to take into account here is the fact that these charts seem to be diegetic. They seem to be something that exists in the text, created by and read by some character somewhere in the story. Right. So
yeah, I think this is a big delineation to draw. This is not Hickman, the author voice.
And the question really is, whose voice is this?
Moira.
And, to me, at least, seeing that there gives a suggestion that we may be seeing somewhere along the line the mark of Magneto, especially having come one page after we just saw The Way We Treat Our Children. And here we have the pretender Wanda Maximoff, which can mean two things. It can mean Wanda Maximoff, the pretender, as a mutant, because she's now been retconned as not being a mutant after all. Or it can be Wanda Maximoff, the pretender to the House of M, because she is not the heir to Magneto, which was her ostensible motivation in that entire depowering episode in the first place.
Tyler?
I have the same question. I was like, oh, what? She's not a mutant anymore? Why is she a pretender? That was the only thing I read into it. And then, when I read through the issue, it seems to me that this is kind of setting the scene. It's sort of like, it gives you statistics to as evidence to back up the conflict. So I think that's what I got from here.
Yeah, I was so taken aback by the shade of it all. The mutant erasure by the pretender, and I had a slightly different reaction to Zach about who it could be. Say it for me, please.
Diegetic.
But diegetically, Yeah?
That depends on how your sentence was going to proceed. But sure, let's go with diegetically.
I had a different reaction to who might have been the one who wrote it diegetically, because I feel like it's more like, if we think about all the lives that have happened before, this is confirmed to be our 10th life now because of the info we got in the last issue. Moira has certainly encountered Wanda before. Definitely in life number 4, because it was pretty much X-Men as we knew it, even if House of M didn't happen. And then does that mean she was part of Faraway when she was considered to be a mutant in number 5? Was she a part of Magneto's House of M as a ruling class in number 8? Like, Moira has some experience with this woman, and you have to think that House of M in R616 happened while Moira was away playing dead, so she couldn't react to it. She couldn't necessarily stop it, or could she? This was a Magneto who had full knowledge of everything that Moira told him about all of the previous lives, and he, in a way, was one of the people who kind of was involved in setting up Wanda for House of M, which of course now has been retconned upon retcon that it was Doctor Doom, it was because she had unstable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to get too deep into the whole history of Wanda. That could be a whole other episode, but I just think it's interesting to approach it from the perspective of Moira, who may have some information we don't have about Wanda Maximoff.
So all this time, that since the whole thing happened with like her 10 life and everything from back in House of X2, I've been reading all these pages as files from Moira. Moira writing something back.
And they easily could be. I mean, we don't know, but that is a strong, strong possibility.
Yeah, I was also thinking that maybe the Powers of 10 ones are by Moira, and then House of X ones are by Xavier. That's something that I was thinking, because the color schemes are often different. But then again, I'm like, well, that's why we have the HiX-Men report, when they can tell me which one is it. So.
I think it's going to be one of the best reveals of the series the first time we see somebody in the text in the issue, like and making an entry. I think
because we've got lots of different clues, like the symbols from the top of these pages showing up on the shoulders of the priest in the X2 timeline, but we've got no firm indication of somebody actually looking at these files in the story, and I'm sure that we will see that before this series is done.
Yeah.
And imagine if it's like Beak or iBoy writing this shit.
I hope it is iBoy. I hope it's iBoy
from the files of iBoy.
Yeah.
All right. So, anything further to add, or shall we move on to the first scene?
I think we can move on.
Let's move on.
Okay. All right. So, Peter, tell us what this scene is about.
Well, I feel kind of bad that we already used Space Oddity as our bumper music before, because this is ground control. We have Professor Xavier has assembled Beast because he's the smart one, apparently. Trinary, who's from X-Men Red, which has ramifications for what we know about this story, to be the one who interfaces with his computers, the Technopath, and Storm to do some kind of hydrokinetic cloud mist receiver to be able to communicate widely what's happening with the folks who are doing the mission near the sun. For real.
Right. One thing I want to say, that the first thing that came to my mind, that kind of grabbed me in the first thing, was the visual of how that techno, let's see if we can share that, right over there. That, I was like, whoa, talk about art. I feel like this is the place where we talk about the Lorez's art. Like, I really, really loved it. First of all, my first reaction was, oh my God, Storm. And then second was, oh, look at that. And then I'm like, what's happening? Why do we need this? Kind of like my 1, 2, and 3. So, Zach, why don't you tell us your reaction?
Well, it's a cool visual, and I actually, Lorez has done some really, really great work in this series, and I don't want to sell that short. I was not wild about all of his art here. I feel like at times he verged a little bit too far into sort of Imonen-esque cartooniness at moments that weren't appropriate for it. But that panel looks really cool, especially with the coloring. And conceptually, it's sort of the equivalent of a hologram screen in an all-organic environment. So I guess it makes sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't really
cool
need
point
to be there, but, it's I can see why it's there.
Right.
I mean, for me, I have almost the same reaction as Freya. It's like, oh, this is really cool. This is what Hickman is pitching to MCU when the X-Men movie comes up. They're gonna use Storm this way, and then I'm like, but why are they using Storm to render 3D images? I mean, they could very well just see each other on the psychic plane. Like, you know, why is there a need to do this? Besides, it's cool. I mean, in fact, I think Storm is like, I don't know why I'm here. Well, sort of. That's what she said, or something like that. The other thing I kind of want to point out is that when Professor X says, you know, Xavier says like, and as for myself, connection, the art there, that symbol, which is hidden behind the word balloon, it looks like a start.
It does. It's
symbol.
It's the standby symbol.
Yeah, standby. Yeah, I know. So I thought it looks really cool. I mean, and you know, pretty good design. And then here is also, it involves our newest technopath, which it was mentioned, you know, is she involved in the Big Brother? Or is that Big Brother? No. What's that?
Sleeping
Giant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I felt, you know, there's only 2 pages, so I don't want to get too lost here, but I do feel like we felt the heavy hand of Hickman authorially here. You know, we haven't seen Storm yet. He knows that he wants to get some of these characters on panels. So we have Storm. Storm, if you know your Claremont well, has a long-established psychic connection of friendship with Jean, and has been long established as, for a non-psychic, probably the strongest psychic, if that makes any sense. Like, she's not a psychic, but when it comes to astral plane stuff of the non-psychics, Storm is by far the most powerful. And so I just thought that was like a nice continuity nod. Like, I actually, reading Phoenix Resurrection by Matthew Rosenberg at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, I was a little bit annoyed that Storm wasn't used more there because of that connection to Jean. So to me, it felt like Hickman kind of like nodding to that. And also Trinary, I think, is really interesting because Trinary says that did X-Men Red happen? I know a lot of people have been like, this isn't the 616. This is subtly different. You know, Trinary probably exists in every life of Mora, but this is a pretty strong signal to us that the most recent continuity has probably occurred, that we see Trinary here with the X-Men. This is the latest piece of continuity that we've seen in 7 issues so far. So I do think it
certainly is an indication that Hickman is not going to deliberately ignore the events of recent continuity, which seem to at least be a possibility on the table until now.
Yeah, I mean, X-Men Red happened as recently as less than 12 months ago. So this was during the period that Hickman was already forming this pitch. And I think it gives us a pretty solid signal that this does integrate. So I just think that was good. And Trinity is a really cool character. One of the coolest parts of X-Men Red by Tom Taylor.
And she was recently created. Like, you know, she's like a very recent addition.
Yes, she debuted whenever that first issue of X-Men Red was, like May 2018, June 2018. Yeah. And then the final thing here is that if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen that I've gotten a little bit angsty about Jean being in her mini dress. We talked about it in the last episode. But I think that this projection thing helps justify the design choice, again, with the authorial hand, because Jean in her mask is a really amazing visual to do here. And it's not the same thing as seeing Jean without her mask.
But speaking of dresses, though, I saw that Storm dress. I loved it.
That's a great Storm costume design.
Storm is never poorly dressed, to be fair. Storm, in any given scene with any given group of comic characters, Storm will always be the best dressed. This is just a fundamental rule.
Like, to be honest, and we talked about the MCU again. I was like, I saw that. I'm like, damn it, Dana Igrea is like, you know, cast as a wrong. She should have been Storm. Like, I just kind of kept on thinking about that because, you know, she's just like looking at it like, why am I here? Is this gonna work? What's happening?
Well, and I also like the fact that he redesigned her tiara a little bit so that it goes all the way back, you know, so that it becomes like a headband kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I wanted a full page of like her just standing there looking like this. Like, you know, that was just so cool. So question is, like, you brought up like she has a psychic connection, like a more psychic connection for a non-psychic, whatever it is that however way you said it. Is that because of her religion? No?
Zach, you've most recently read some of this stuff. Do you even feel as though I'm right in talking about Storm's psychic capacity?
I don't think that Storm has ever been established as having higher than usual psychic capacity. She certainly has more experience than some of the rest of the X-Men. That has a lot to do with her fairly frequent battles with the Shadow King that have happened over the years. But that's just an outgrowth of circumstance and history rather than anything having to do with her powers.
Well, I think Claremont has always written people who are resistant to psychic invasion as being really strong-willed person.
Right,
and
Storm
is super strong-willed. Like, she's very self-assured of herself. She has, I think that sort of stems off from there, because Magneto has the same kind of what is written similarly as well, because he's really strong-willed as well.
And speaking of Magneto, though, that man has not left Xavier's side since the beginning. Like,
they still seem to be operating as a unit. I don't think he has any dialogue in this issue, but
I forgot he was there for a second.
He is there as silent support for Charles.
No, he has, I think, one dialogue.
Does he?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, and the thing is, like, as we're going on later, there is like a one, something that I felt like that should have been a Magneto line, but it wasn't, and I was like,
"Oh, yeah."
Well, let's see if we can move through the issue, and we will if we ever make it past these first 2 pages, get to that scene in question.
I have to say one more thing about the omnipresence of Magneto, though, which is that per the timeline, the last thing we knew was their schism from each other. And Magneto and Xavier haven't been like super chummy. I mean, they were both around in Second Coming era, but they haven't been like really buddies for a while. And so it just makes me have more questions about Mora's unseen hand. Like, clearly there's a reason that they're so attached here. And it just makes me more intrigued every time he's on screen and not off doing his own Magneto thing. Because I think we could say he's usually pretty headstrong. He usually kind of does what he feels like.
For I don't know, for some reason the thought that is Magneto the puppet master, because the way he's Professor X, like it just feels like there is something, I don't know, something's going on. Anyway,
something sinister.
What I would posit just from the very basic information that we've been given is that their union might not be as close as it appears, because we do know at the very minimum that there is a House of X and there is a House of M, and these are 2 different things. So whatever alliance exists here, it may be a little bit more tense than we're seeing.
Yeah. All right. So now that we have set the ground control, like that's there, let's move on to the mission itself.
Well, the mission is not going so well. So we flashed the mission. The last thing we saw in the last issue was them blowing up explosives near the hatch of where this Shi'ar craft was landing on the station. And here we find out that they've taken heavy casualties. X-Men have died. People are wounded. And the mission is now seriously in jeopardy. Faria, thoughts on this catastrophe in progress?
Not much. So, Zach?
Well, I think the catastrophe in progress, we knew that something like this was going to be coming, barring some major unforeseen twist. This is basically what we were expecting to see, I think. I'm not sure that there's anything worthy of particular comment here. Do either of you guys think so?
No, I just thought that, we were asking, why did he choose Husk? Well, we know why Hickman chose Husk now. Cannon fodder. Just to kill her. But
and also,
sorry, go ahead. No, but I kind of agree with everyone. But I kind of also like the visual of like Wolverine without muscles in one arm, where it's just bone. And they're like, Wolverine is not complete. I think that's what they say. Something like that. Yeah, not his full self. That's what they say.
Full self. Very awesome observation, Gene. Peter, what's your thought?
Well, I come and go on this idea of killing people off screen for impact. I think it's something that, is meant to communicate the idea of collateral damage. War is hell. People die. It's not always in a heroic way. I think these are 2 fine characters to do that with. Personally, it's not really why I read X-Men. I think that these are characters that we have a long attachment to, and while it is a storytelling device used across many mediums to kill somebody in an unheroic way for maximum impact, I feel like you have to sometimes take into account the amount of time we've put in with some of these characters, and respect that a little bit. And I also, and I don't say that from as a fan, I think they should add a feat. I just think that it's something that takes me out of the narrative sometimes. And also because we're going to get to some more deaths, spoiler alert. And, but we've seen a lot of those characters on the covers of the Dawn of X stuff so far. So you kind of have this extra textual knowledge that there's something that's going to happen that lets us get these characters back. We have not seen Husk and Archangel yet, to the best of my knowledge, on any of the covers and previews. So it kind of again, took me out of it because my plot brain immediately started arranging Jenga pieces of how this is going to turn out. And this is really where I started to go about this issue. But that's me.
So I actually do want to comment a little bit on sort of that macro piece of using these deaths as a motivating factor for the story, because that is what's going to happen here. And a lot of people are going to die. A lot of major characters are going to die. And ultimately what this is going to be for is to lead up to our big emotional moment for Professor Xavier to be motivated to do whatever it is that Professor Xavier is going to be motivated to do. This is his dramatic motivation for the next act of the story. And there are... Yes.
Okay.
We'll certainly get there.
Yeah.
And I think there are two ways. I think there are two ways to look at that, though. And I think one of them is that Hickman is just doing a fairly cliched device as a writer to use death as a motivation for how the story is going to progress. Another way to look at it is that Hickman is trying to do a meta commentary on the use of death as a motivating factor, as he says that X-Men stories repeat the same cycle over and over again. And I want to give a little bit of credit to Magneto Rocks on Twitter for pointing out that this may sort of recontextualize what we just saw in Matthew Rosenberg's Uncanny X-Men run, which was also pretty much a march to the grave of a lot of different X-Men characters, and started out with the line, every X-Men story is the same. So I think if he was writing that with this in mind, and if this story was going to be about breaking the cycle of all of these stories of X-Men dying and trying to change the future and failing and then dying again, is this all supposed to just be a commentary leading up to Hickman saying, we're going to break this cycle forever?
I have thoughts.
I have thoughts too. I was going to wait until some of the other people died, but we can go off now if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead. You guys have strong thoughts. Go ahead.
Yours is more tip of the tongue. Go for it.
I'm just saying, though, is that he sent these people knowing that full well to, at whatever cost, stop the Mothermold. So how is this motivating any more or less? He knows these people are going to die. I'm pretty sure the way he gave them the marching order, it was pretty much at whatever cost. So if he's surprised, oh shit, they're dead, then he's a dum-dum. Xavier is a dum-dum. Nothing.
You may be right. You may be right. I'm not arguing with that at all. I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. But as we're going to see at the end of this issue, I mean, he is emotionally affected by this in a very, very big way. So, I mean, Hickman clearly wants us to think that Xavier is broken up by what's happened on this mission, whether or not he was or should have been expecting it.
I read that so differently, so we're going to have fun talking at the end.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the other half of what Zach brought up, though, which is that this idea of Hickman kind of all X-Men stories are the same. Maybe because I'm just a cynical asshole, and that is my role here on the Brady Bunch. But as we were reading this issue, as the deaths start unfurling, I'm like, this is Hickman making fun of the kind of things that X-Men fans get wound up about. Everybody loves their heroic X-Men death scenes, and here he's just flinging them out at high speed, and we'll get to all of them. And in a way, it sort of made me think that this is him mocking the X-Men karaoke. He's like, oh yeah, people are going to cry. You have CB Akira Yoshida on Twitter being like, people are going to cry during this issue. I laughed. Maybe it means I'm a psychopath, or maybe it means I'm a very well-read X-Men fan, but I laughed.
I didn't even laugh or cry. I was supposed to cry because in that case, mission failed, sir. Just like those humans' mission, the mission failed.
I cry a lot during comic books too. I'm a crier. I cry at Cheerios commercials. Like I cry, but
Yeah,
I didn't
no, I mean,
cry.
not here. No, sir. Don't say sir, as in like whoever Marvel editor that's doing this. Don't say that we should be crying. No, this is not the reason we cry. Take it back.
Okay.
But anyway, let's move on because we got to get to that last panel so we can have a discussion.
Like, she's like such a producer. She's like, I smell conflicts.
Yeah, now we got to make a beeline to our argument on the last page. But you have to watch the rest of the show before we get there.
Before we moved on, I just want to point out that it is at this point where I'm like, okay, what I expect the current X-Men to be is the truth. So I'm not even so with that assumption, I started enjoying this issue like a lot more than with last issue, because last issue I was still having a question mark. So as in like, is Hickman deliberately doing this, or is Hickman really writing them badly? And then now I feel like, okay, this is deliberate for sure. So and then I started enjoying it a lot more.
That's a good point.
Okay.
That's a really good point.
Let's keep going so we can talk about all these different points. All right.
All right, so I think this is going to be like a mid-issue lightning round as opposed to our end-of-issue lightning round, because we basically have to cover a lot of people getting killed. So Nightcrawler takes everybody away to their various missions because there's 4 locking collars on the Mothermold head, and they all have to be separately disengaged because the humans at least had that much forethought. And so he takes Cyclops, Wolverine himself, and Mystique out into the station to do that, leaving Jean only defended by Monet, and we get one of the coolest Monet panels that we've ever had, really, but also a panel that's like, what, really? And Freya, as the person who knows the least about Monet in this quartet, why don't we start with Freya's reaction to Monet's heroic end here?
No, I mean, I didn't know she could do this. So this is
none of us did.
I'm like, wait, there's a character who can do this, and Peter never told me about this. I was like fuming about that. But no, I was like, whoa, now I need to know more about Monet. Like that's where I was kind of going with this. And like I'm like, good on her, girl. But to be honest though, I really thought a lot about you during this, like Peter, especially like how they did a dirty for your girl, Marvel girl. How they kind of used her like as more of a telephone communication and making a lot of weird facial expressions. So we can talk about that a little bit more, I think. So Zach.
Well, I want to pass this over to Peter because you specifically mentioned that Peter has had some things to say about this here and on Twitter and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, but before Peter starts, I want to ask Peter a question. Is this Monet or is this the twins?
I see, that to me is so interesting because so Tyler, can you actually explain it? You might explain it better than me. What is the deal with
if
Monet?
He can, he'll be the first.
Oh my God.
Let's hear it, Tyler.
Yeah.
Well, so when Monet was first introduced in Gen X, she's actually not Monet. She's actually her 2 twin sister combining into her and acting like her, right?
I know sounds like Tyler's explaining this wrong. I assure you Tyler is explaining this 100%.
Yeah. And also, I'll note for somebody who was reading at the time, the first real semi-respectful articulation of an autistic character on the page. We are meant to think that M is seriously autistic and sometimes does not accept inputs from the outside world and has trouble relating to people, which is the case, but it's the case that she's combined these 2 twins, and that's the version of Monet we see. Meanwhile, Tyler, where was the Monet that we know in the present day?
She is... Oh, no, I can't remember where she is now. She's this character.
She's
just
locked.
Yeah, she's
inside.
Locked into the... Yeah, correct.
And this was a character named
Penance.
This was another. Yes, the character was named Penance. That's the form that we're seeing here, and that was seemingly a different member of the Generation X team.
Yep. And so the real Monet was locked into this form by her brother, who is Amplate, who actually the one that sucks the life energy to survive. And I think he's being locked in a different dimension. So yeah, I think that's the gist of it. And all four of them are like siblings.
Everybody.
The 90s, ladies and gentlemen.
You know what? Hickman can erase the fuck out of this. We gotta start from scratch.
No.
It's cool. It's actually
really cool.
It's really well done.
And this is, by the way, Hickman is on the record saying that this is one of his favorite X-Men series, this 90s Generation X.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Monet is one of his top 5 characters, so you know he was waiting to do this. So Penance is like diamond hard. She's sharp on every possible angle. If you touch her, you get a cut, which I forget if that's like her trying to protect herself against Emplet or the result of being calcified by Emplet. I don't recall. But we've never, in my recollection, seen Monet, since she's been single person Monet out of the Penance form, ever shift into this form, which, to be fair, I think draws a really interesting parallel between her and Emma, since Emma's secondary mutation, which happens after we know Penance, is to have a diamond form. Now we have Monet, a former student of Emma, utilizing this pretty much diamond form as her even more aggressive form. Not that she can't kick people's ass without it. So there's a lot of layers. This is like
and Monet, who's always been set up as like a somewhat resentful protege of Emma right from the beginning. Yeah. I mean, the two of them have always been like, they've seen each other as mirror images of each other, and they sort of embrace that and sort of are offended by it as they see themselves in each other.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm kind of into it. It feels like it, like in a way, completed a loop for Monet that we've been waiting to have completed, even though she's been put to great use the past couple of years. It just like clicks for me, kind of.
Yeah. This is one of the image or one of the story points in this issue that is a good WTF for me. It's a good WTF because they are like really bad WTF.
All right. So the thing is, we talked about Hickman's use of X-Women in so far, and there is particular one, Peter, that you are not happy with, and I feel like the Monet's heroic comes at the expense of the one that you don't necessarily care for. So should we talk about that a little bit?
I don't know if I'm ready yet. I'll just make one comment. So Monet says something to Jean on this page. She says, next time, try, I don't know what to say, Marvel Girl, try harder. Now, she's calling Jean Marvel Girl, which seems a little bit diminishing, but I don't know if we can even take like a continuity look at that, because that sounds like Monet. Like, you've heard me say that Hickman's not doing great with the voices to this point. That was Monet's voice. Yeah. Like
that is Monet's voice, except for that dunno, that D-U-N-N-O. I don't think that I have ever, I know that this is picky as hell, but if I'm writing dialogue for that character, I don't know that I would ever have her say something quite that casual.
Maybe just because she's being so flip to Jean in the moment, I bought it. But I just, to me, that was like, that's that Monet condescension that I love. So to me, that just affirmed, I'm like, okay, Hickman may have a cool plan for Monet based on this page.
But like when she used the word dunno, I mean, I feel as if she's trying to mock Jean and say that, in a valley girl way. I don't know.
I don't know.
Try harder, the kind of thing.
As the lady of this panel, let me try to say it.
Yeah, get in there, Freya. Personally, I think
Fangirlz just got cast as Monet in the MCU X-Men film.
She is my personal fan cast for Monet. Yeah. I'll just put it out there and say that.
No, but I took it slightly different from Peter, as in like, I mean, okay, firstly, the use of Marvel Girl here is a bad WTF for me. I'm like, what? She's just there to be like connecting. So why is she there at all, right? But the other thing is that when M calls her Marvel Girl and she's dressed in her original costume, I'm just guessing, is this the younger version of Jean Grey as opposed to the 616 Jean Grey? So, the one that have not been through Phoenix, have not died and died again. So,
I feel like there are some pod people truthers out there who are trying to dig, how Hickman lies, right? He's a liar. He just claims that he's a liar. And these pod people truthers are basically saying, like, well, maybe the reason they're all in different outfits is because it's meant to signal where in continuity their pod has been like duplicated from, and maybe the reason we're getting this kind of like hanging back low-key Jean is because she's literally Jean from sometime before Uncanny X-Men 100. I am not coming down on either direction on this theory. I think it's a very interesting theory, but it certainly has set the little dealy boppers and antenna of our speculators aflame.
All right, so shall we then continue to the next thing, or do we want to talk about?
Let's continue.
No,
I think Marvel Girl we should talk about at the end.
But I want to make one more point. Like, I think Cyclops is used here really well as well. He makes good tactical decision, right? Like, decision. So it's like, oh, Mystique has to go into the habitat because she can just change herself into another human and blend in, right? And he puts Wolverine near the security part because, well, Wolverine kills, right? So I think he makes a really good. So that is sort of like my defense of Hickman. He knows the character because, Cyclops is supposed to be really, really tactical here.
I don't know. Yes, I think he's a good tactical leader all throughout this issue. I think in this issue and others, I think that that's really all that we see from Cyclops. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think Hickman is doing a great job writing him. I think that Hickman is doing a great job writing one dimension of him, but that's not a fully rounded character.
And we didn't see enough. We haven't seen enough to have many dimension yet.
But that's a problem because we're more than halfway through this Hodgepodge series, and we haven't seen enough of one of the main characters to be able to know whether he's a well-rounded human being.
But is he supposed to be the main character?
Yeah,
he's a main character. I'd be hard pressed to say who's a more main character that we've seen so far than Cyclops. I don't think anybody else has really emerged.
Magneto.
Have they gotten significantly more screen time? Moira got an issue to herself. Xavier hasn't. Magneto hasn't. They've been basically cameo appearances just as much as Cyclops has.
And Cyclops is the only mutant that we've seen outside of the direct contents of Krakoa because of the first issue. So in a way, he is one of our point of views into this story because we've seen him in the outside world. Same for Mystique. I think that there's kind of several tiers of characters. I don't think we have to get an argument about who the protagonist is, but there's the characters who are very much inside the bubble of knowledge here, which is like Moira off screen, Xavier, Magneto, Apocalypse in Life 9. Nimrod. Then there's the characters who we can feel sympathy for, and I think that includes the characters who we see like outside that ring. And then there's like the widest ring of characters who are just kind of being used as like cannon fodder reaction panels. And I think Cyclops is in that second ring. He's one of the people we're supposed to be viewing the story through, I think.
But the thing is, like, you were talking about that, we only saw one dimension, and but the thing is, he only have done one thing so far. It's just running this mission. And as a part of this mission, he's just being a leader, which is his one dimension.
Well, I don't think that's totally true. We've seen him interact with the Fantastic Four. We've seen him interact with Xavier and Magneto. We've seen him assemble his team, and now we've seen him as a field leader in command during a crisis situation. So these are not, like, because of the way this story is being written, and again, I think that this is itself kind of a critique, we haven't seen him in any quiet situations, we haven't seen him in any humorous situations, we haven't seen him in any downtime scenes with his friends, but we've seen him, as far as the story goes, in a number of different circumstances, and it's really all been the same characterization. He's the no-nonsense tactical leader.
I don't know, man. We were talking about Cyclops before.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
And he's also really self-deprecating right before he died here.
I think we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, the thing is, and that's the thing, depending on the situation, he was acting like the Cyclops that needed to be. That's what I'm saying. It's like, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always Furry had the sass monster.
Yeah.
No, I don't think Hickman is doing a bad job writing Cyclops brand. I'm not saying
he's still one-dimensional to you.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that particularly stands out as saying, oh, this is a Cyclops with an unusual amount of depth. This is more to Cyclops than I've seen before. I haven't seen anything in the story that gives me that sense. I think he's doing a fine job writing the character.
Right. One place Cyclops does have a depth. Anyway, I'm going to talk about it in another episode.
Not his depth perception after that Rosenberg run. Anyway.
Like, burn. Okay, next chapter. Where shall we go from here?
So look, while Jean is being defended by Monet, the scenes have already begun and continue of these 4 X-Men around the station. So as Zach and Tyler just alluded to, Wolverine and Cyclops easily dispatch their people. Nightcrawler, in a non-violent way, manages to dispatch his people. Mystique seems to hit a little bit of a snag and says that she got turned around.
Yeah.
Freya, do you believe that Mystique got turned around in the station on the way to the habitat?
No, she didn't. I read Brian K. Vaughan's Mystique, and I tell you, she didn't. She didn't get turned around. She didn't. She something else was going on. Either Magneto gave her a side project or something. Something else was going on. There's no way she ever got sidetracked. And also, there's no way Mystique could have been captured like that and had that, like, just completely oblivious and not figuring out. That's a bad writing. That's not the Mystique.
Well,
Zach?
I don't know, Marvel Girl. If Mystique really did plan to do all this, that is certainly not the face of somebody whose plan is going the way she expected to when she gets sucked out of that air hatch. So either things have really gone off course for her if she meant to get turned around, or that's a real error in the art that is not conveying what it should be conveying. Because this, I mean, look at that face. That's the face of somebody who's not where she wants to be.
Nobody plans to be sent out in airlock except for maybe Ford Prefect. But I don't think that's that kind of situation here. So I don't know. Tyler, do you think Mystique got turned around?
No. I mean, the other clue that I think that she didn't get turned around was that she's supposed to blend in. But here, she's not even transformed. She's just walking around as if, I own the place, which is not, well, I mean, if I can shift and I'm trying to do something of, covert, I'm not going to be like in blue skin, obviously, right? So something else might have happened.
So if her plan was to get turned around, and I would pose this to you, Peter, what is she trying to do?
So I don't know. I don't know if you guys have heard. What point did I cut off?
We heard you. You kind of had stopped. And then we were like, great, we're just going to move on to Zach.
Oh, no, I lost connection. So my connection was lost. No, I was saying, like, I don't know if you guys heard that I said that Magneto gave her a side project. Do you feel that? Like, that's what I was thinking.
Well, and she kind of had that let's make a deal moment with Xavier. I think it was in Pox 1. It's been a while. And Powers of 10 #1.
Pox 1.
Where she's like, whoa, what do I get? And he's like, you want something more than saving the mutant race? And she's like, yeah. And we were speculating, like, is it to get Destiny back? Like, what does Mystique want the most? So you kind of have to assume there's something. This is just too ominous. It's too much of a gun, Chekhov's gun. There's a lot of Chekhov's gun going off in this series. And I just think that there's no way that we're supposed to believe that Mystique just got lost. I think if Hickman just wanted to convey that she had taken a long time to get there, she would have been like encountered some resistance. I don't think she would have said got turned around. So to me, it's very significant. Now, the question is, what could she have done on the space station that can't even transmit back to Xavier on Earth that would have been significant enough to make it worth possibly risking the whole mission because she doesn't unlock her collar? What could that be?
So if we are to throw something out there, we have posited in the past that there was a plan to upload something into the mental workings of the Mothermold, and that maybe this thing could be the consciousness of, say, Moira MacTaggert herself. That may have been the mission, because it does seem, as far as everybody else on this mission is concerned, that they are there simply to cast the Mothermold into the sun and nothing more. That this is a mission to destroy Mothermold and not to do anything more elaborate than that. If there were a more elaborate plan to put something into Mothermold's programming and change whatever Nimrod's trajectory is going to be, you may be right that Mystique supposedly getting turned around is the point when that would have happened.
Yep.
Yeah. Is she responsible for using Zach's words, plant the Moira bomb?
I think we're up to Plantinals now. I think Plantinals is the word.
Well, no.
The
Plantinals is a completely different conspiracy theory whereby Xavier has planted ticking psychic bomb in the minds of humans who have taken Krakoan drugs.
So what's our special name for this particular tinfoil hat?
This is stage 2 of the Mora bomb. The Mora bomb has now been transferred back into Life 10 and loaded up onto the mind of Mothermold as it goes into the sun to mutate.
Yeah. And, I was of the opinion from the beginning that Mystique, by necessity, is one of the people who kind of is on to Mora because of destiny, which means she's willingly or not in that circle of trust with Xavier and Magneto. If you think back, I talked in the first or second episode about the idea that this has elevated Mystique to be one of the big movers and shakers in a way that she hasn't been before, even though she's been a pretty big mover and shaker. So I do tend to think that there's something else here, and I think we'll get it in one of the upcoming Powers of 10 issues.
And remember that Xavier owes her something, and that's another loaded Chekhov's gun in this story. We are going to have to find out at some point what is the favor that was promised to Mystique in exchange for her service.
So Freya, take us home on Mystique here.
No, I mean, I just all I say that I didn't for a second. I got turned around. I'm like, no, you didn't, girl.
Oh boy.
And I didn't even think about that. Why she's walking around wearing a blue. I thought that maybe she had changed and then she just changed back. That the fact that she always likes to be in her true self all the time. I thought that was kind of what it alluding to. But I kind of agree with Peter, with Tyler, that why is she hanging around as herself?
Yeah,
that's just weird. But anyway.
And then there's also one small bit of nitpicking. It's okay, so they release section 2 and section 4, but in the art 2 and 4 is right next to each other. I'm like, oh, they really named the thing really weird because it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 2 and 4, and then 1 and 3.
Oh, my friend, I can tell you about naming convention in a plant designed by engineers. I can tell you that. I can tell you a lot of things about it.
So that's deliberate?
Yeah, that's deliberate because we like to do that to fuck with people. So that when they come to our plant, they just deliberately gets turned around. Yeah. Why on earth the dryer that was put later on is called dryer 1 and the one that was put first is dryer 2? Don't ask me, but that's how we roll. So you know what? Not nitpicky. That's how we do. Hickman got that part right. Characters are all wrong. That is right.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing also I thought was kind of maybe it's really obvious, but I like the fact that they show Wolverine killing everyone there, and then they show Nightcrawler just tying 2 people up. So just to sort of show the difference between these 2 characters.
That I really like that. I caught that too. Yeah. But anyway, all right. So the next.
So after Mystique fails, they have to disengage the collar that's remaining in some other way, and they're not going to be able to get into that room because it has been vented into space. And so, unfortunately, Cyclops needs to make a really tough decision, and ultimately involves the sacrifice of 2 of the characters who have been frequently sacrificed in the past decade, Nightcrawler and Wolverine.
And we get a nice little character moment here.
Yeah, I did like that because the thing is, I kind of know of their friendship, that they're always kind of hanging around together and always kind of giving each other more like Nightcrawler giving him moral support, you need to do this, and all that. So I kind of really love that. So yeah, it was a good character moment for me.
And I would say that for those who do want to sign on to the pod person truther movement, Wolverine's dialogue may give a little bit more grist for that mill when he says, just wondering what someone like me should expect, which on the surface may mean, an old sinner like Logan, or could it mean an unholy pod person clone abomination like this Wolverine is? I'm not going to vouch to claim one way or the other.
Wolverine just died, and he's been to hell once previously.
This is funny. These 2 people, both of these guys have been dead. These are 2 people who have already experienced death.
Cry.
Yeah.
So that actually my question. I have one of the questions regarding that. But Tyler, you go ahead with your.
Well, I mean, it is Hickman sort of acknowledging a little bit of the continuity, because here Wolverine is asking Nightcrawler, who is supposedly an angel, what's going to happen to me when I die? Like, is there room for me up there? Which is very uncharacteristics of Wolverine here. So I don't know, but I love the fact that their friendship is acknowledged, and the fact that Nightcrawler is like, you know what? Don't worry, you'll be there.
And I'm gonna embrace you with open arms or whatever.
But it's this weird mixture of acknowledging continuity and also seemingly ignoring it. Because yes, it leans back on the long friendship that these two characters have had, and yet doesn't acknowledge that they've both just been dead in the not too distant past at all. And maybe that's just like a weird little oversight. Maybe it's Hickman just not leaning into the fact that comic book death is a strange thing and we just shouldn't mention it. Or maybe there really is an in-story explanation for why these characters don't seem to think they've been dead before.
Dear viewers, you're seeing us just lose our minds at this point. We're in the first issue of the back half of this series, and we've had now a lengthy discussion about the word dunno, and now we're trying to speculate how many times these two characters have died previous to this panel. I mean, this is the level of wild speculation that Hickman is causing right now, and that's why, in many ways, this is such a success. I mean, I'll just double down on what you all said, especially being in the kind of 180s of Claremont in my own reread right now. He really establishes a beautiful non-toxic masculinity love between these two characters. They care deeply for one another. They're some of their closest friends, as have been proven again and again at weddings and funerals throughout the Marvel Universe. And I think that it's really great to see these two characters who have such an undying love for one another, even though, as we just pointed out, Wolverine killed a bunch of people and Nightcrawler left them in zip ties. And yet, despite that philosophical divide, they still have this moment together. I thought it was a nice moment. This is probably where people cried. Honestly, I expect that this and then the subsequent disintegration of both of them in the sun's rays is probably where most people.
It's also, if I may just add, looking back on that continuity and history of friendship between those two characters, I think Hickman actually really does get this right. And I do want to give him credit for this character beat, because this is a good character beat, because they haven't just been friends for a very long time, but I think Wolverine, in a lot of ways, the way that friendship has been depicted, he looks to Nightcrawler not just for friendship, but for a kind of quiet absolution, because he is ashamed of the way that he himself kind of is a toxic male, and he is oftentimes brutal and savage and a killer, and he's scared of that, and he knows that Nightcrawler is in a lot of ways a better man than he is, and he wants to know that he can be better too. And this is him in his final moments turning to Nightcrawler for that absolution one last time.
I always kind of love them because they're such opposite people, yet they come together, like, you know, as like such a nice bond between them. That was one of the highlight for me, like a revelation for me actually, when I was reading Aaron's Wolverine run. I'm like, oh, these two are buddies, and they actually really like each other. So yeah, I did kind of like that a lot. But the thing is, my question is, how were the recent Wolverine death was depicted? Because the Aaron's one, the going to hell, was kind of done in a way that he kind of knew that he was going there. It was kind of different. Like, he knew he was coming. Like, I don't know. So was death? So maybe this time around they're seeing something different. I don't know.
There's been such ambiguity since Wolverine has come back from his most recent death. The death occurred just prior to Secret Wars, right? But because we got the Wolverine series with Mystique and Daken and Lara all being Wolverines, and then he really has only come back in the last year and a half, and we haven't really had anything definitive about what he was experiencing other than he's got hot claws. Which seems to indicate that he went to somewhere warm, like, I don't know, Acapulco or hell. But I don't think we've gotten a whole ton of commentary from Logan himself. He hasn't been in a ton of comic books, which has actually been kind of like a nice relief. He was in The Return of Wolverine. He was in the Infinity Wars stuff a little bit, but really hasn't been too overused yet. So yeah, I think it's been left nice and loose, knowing perhaps that Hickman was going to be using him in the X-Men relaunch.
One more thing that I do want to just draw attention to before we move on to the next part of this scene is there's a little bit of an echo of phrasing here, which I think is very deliberate. when Wolverine asks, you still think there's something waiting for us on the other side? And if I recall correctly, that other side phrasing is the same phrasing that we heard back in, what was it, Pox 1, in that first scene with Cardinal, Rasputin, and Percival. So I think that there's some significance here. Whatever the other side means, I think there's something beyond the obvious that Hickman is trying to get at here.
Right. So before we move on to the next scene, I do want to talk about the two bad ladies, like, bad guys.
Yeah.
Bad ladies, bad gals. I mean, I don't know. Let's talk about them.
Well, I mean, we discussed a little bit about about the Holocaust line last issue, right? And I feel like Zach's version of it is actually a little bit more closer to what I think Hickman is trying to do when he just randomly, not randomly, when he just used that line. Because here, I think Karima was saying that, like, will Mothermold be sane, right? Will she be insane here? Because I think she doesn't have time to cross that line yet.
Mm.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
No, please.
Well, I was going to say we're about to see Mothermold be activated in a way that raises the question whether or not this is sanity. And I think that's very much open to debate.
And these two women, it's interesting. Aramis was the guy who Erasmus was the suicide bomber last issue, and you got the sense that he was the true believer of this group. This woman scientist who we're left with is she seems more concerned with the health and welfare of Mothermold than she does maybe necessarily with the human race, which it's meant to defend, which is an interesting contrast, because we got so much thematic stuff hammering us about how they never had kids, they wish they had kids, and now she's really concerned with her progeny in a way. Mothermold here, I think she doesn't to me seem like one of these true believers who hates all mutants in the same way. Even as we get her being violent a little bit later in the issue, it's because of her husband's death. And then you have Karima, who Tyler keeps pointing out again and again, and I agree, she does not, there's something strange going on with her here. She doesn't seem totally bought in either. Is she a sleeper? Is she just feeling a little bit at distance to this? I don't know. So it's kind of interesting that we are now, our two perspective characters on Team Human are like two characters who are not the most Team Human of all of the characters. In a way, the lady scientist is Team Machine, and so is Karima.
Yeah, and Karima said something here that she's an observer. So who is she observing for?
Right, she says she can't issue commands. She's like, lady, get with it, because I'm not allowed to tell anybody on the ship what to do. Yeah, so who is she there on the behalf of exactly? Have we really heard that way back in that intro scene of her in House of X-1?
That's an excellent question.
The one thing that I would say, though, I don't think I've ever seen it before where, a lady villain or lady character all of a sudden got jumped into action because her dude died. This is
it's usually the other way.
The other way. This is the first time I've seen it. I mean, it's one of those things, but you were talking about Peter, you were talking about earlier this episode about using plot devices that, killing people off as plot devices and stuff, and how that doesn't kind of rhyme with you. One thing that doesn't I cannot stand when writers try to get me to sympathize with bad guys or ladies, and seems like there is a little bit of that to oh my God, you killed my husband. I'm like, yeah, but he was mutinous or whatever it is that you call it. He was anti-mutant.
Mutaphobe.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to sympathize with you. And
let's be fair, he blew himself up.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. And I'm like, but I think Tyler had a point about that, something to do radicalization, but that I'll let Tyler talk about at a later point. But I don't know. And it's just I kind of liked that aspect of it, but at the same time, there was this other words that she was throwing around. I'm like, lady, calm down.
Well, look, before we get to the grand finale here, including that violence we've been teasing, we do have a few moments of sentience from Mothermold as she tips away from the collar and into the sun. And she says some very interesting things.
Peter, could I request that you do a dramatic reading of Mothermold's dialogue as she flies into the sun? Could I make that request?
Oh, sure. Let's see. So Nightcrawler ports our poor friend Logan out. Nightcrawler immediately gets atomized by the heat of the sun. Wolverine is hacking away. And Mothermold comes online. She says, if man made me, then they are God, and you are Titans, their spoiled lineage. But while you war, we children sit in judgment of those above us. We judge and find you both wanting. Do you hear us, Olympus? We've stolen your fire, and with it, we will burn you all.
So this is quite a scene. And once again, Hickman has given the best lines of dialogue in an issue to his robot.
Yeah.
And well done, Peter. Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
So I want to talk about this because I think there are some really interesting themes being brought out here. And I want to start with saying that I think that what this scene does, first of all, is it recontextualizes the position of the machines the same way that we saw Apocalypse's position being recontextualized during his death scene a couple of issues back. That up until now, the machines are really the one faction that we have not been given a reason to sympathize with. But here we have them being cast and the role of, as Mothermold is describing it, the children of these two groups of warring, decadent, selfish gods that just fight and fight and fight, and they don't realize that they've done nothing but bring violence into the universe. And it's only the machines that have the judgment and the wisdom to be able to use this technology that man has created for the betterment of the universe. It's the first time that we've seen the machine's position being put in a sympathetic light. The other thing has to do with this theme of children warring against their parents who are also equal to gods. That we've seen over and over again, someone in the role of children either deferring to the gods and worshiping them the way that we saw that Church of the Future worshiping the machines that they regarded as gods, or rebelling against them and fighting them the way that we see Mothermold doing here. And this brings up some themes that have to do, I'm sorry to say, with modern philosophy. And Peter, I guess you know what time that is.
Oh, so we're not going to have a mythological corner of this episode, but we have repurposed our song to Zach's philosophy corner. From the Nietzschean nihilists to political Zionists, he's got the wisdom you ordered. So know yourself, my mutant brothers. It's Zach's philosophy corner. It's Zach's philosophy corner.
Well, thank you very much for that, Peter. So, this question of how you progress past either worshiping or fighting against your parent figure, who's also a god figure, this is not a question that I'm just coming up with out of nowhere. This is a theme that is right at the center of another comic series that Jonathan Hickman wrote, A Red Mass for Mars. And I don't know if anybody else on this panel has read that. But that is a series that is specifically about how does a society achieve utopia? And he comes up with a thesis that he's taking directly from modern philosophy and specifically from the philosopher Martin Buber. And what he says is that society progresses through 4 different stages. From eternity, which is basically deferential worship in faith in the gods, so that you're going to find utopia only after death. Then freedom, which is everybody free to pursue their own interests, but with nothing knitting them together. Then equality, which is everybody placed on absolute equal status, but with destruction of individuality, just total homogeneity. And then finally, fraternity, which in Hickman's words is a collective of individuals dedicated to the betterment of each other, a brotherhood of all men. It is you, it is me, forever. That's Hickman from A Red Mass for Mars. I think that in bullet point form is exactly what Hickman is doing with the themes of the series that we're reading right here. And what I would suggest, and what I think that we should keep an eye on going forward, is that we have actually seen each of those stages represented by one of the stages in the timelines that's been depicted in HiX-Men so far. I think that if we look at every X to the 0 power, which is every X-Men story prior to this, what we're looking at is near liberty. A state of freedom, people being basically free to pursue their own interests, men and mutants alike. But the result of that is just a constant war for supremacy. Nothing knitting them together, just perpetual cycles of violence between humans and mutants. If we look to the far future, X to the 3rd power, the phalanx is absolute equality. It's everybody subsumed into one collective intelligence, but with no individuality left. So it's just as much of a threat to existence as just freedom with nothing tying them together. Eternity is X to the 2nd power, that war between the humans and the machines and the mutants, where we even hear Apocalypse promising life eternal. He uses the phrase, and the only way that people think they're going to find any hope is to die and find a life after death. So what remains then is to find fraternity here in X to the 1st power, Krakoa. And there's going to have to be a way for humans and mutants and machines to form a society where they each have their individual independence, but also have some kind of brotherhood looking out for each other's interests. That's utopia. And just one more thing that I'd bring up. One of the translations for the words utopia is no place. And if you remember the black seeds of Krakoa, they create something called a no place. So Hickman is trying to draw our attention right back to that phrase, and that's today's Philosophy Corner.
You heard it here, folks. First, folks.
Mind blown. I'm just gonna say.
That's hardcore. Are our friends at the HiX Talks going to be talking about that this week as well?
So I shared that little thesis with our friends at HiX Talks last night, and we are going to be discussing that further. And I will hope I will hope that makes its way into their discussions as well.
Yeah, for those of you who have never read it, HiX Talks is a weekly talk column about all of these kind of more Zachian themes that we've been covering here. It started off on XavierFiles.com, now it's on Polygon, and it's a really good, if you're watching this, you probably should also read that, then you'll get like the whole way into each of these issues.
Yeah, so if you're a fan of my extremely boring portions of this show, please check out their much more interesting write-ups every Friday on Polygon.
Yeah, but with no theme song, so trade-offs.
Yeah, we're better that way.
I think what's really interesting about all of that, though, is that they're not necessarily sequential in this story. Like, we might actually end. Are we going to end in the one that is the most evolved? Because they've been scattered across the times, and there's no telling where X3 is now. And I don't know. I think we could make a whole infographic based on that. I think. It's
I think to me the big question is Xavier doing it right or wrong? Like, based on what we've seen of Krakoa so far, and it's a pretty limited view so far, is this fraternity or isn't it? Have Xavier and Magneto created an ideal society on that island? Or do they think that they've created it, but they're actually going down a path that's not going to lead where they want it to lead?
I think that's a key question for this last section. So now that the Mothermold head has been released, Cyclops is making his way back to Jean. He gets interrupted, and everything goes badly for everyone. Faria, what did you think about these final moments in the issue here?
I think the most that kind of I already talked about it. She was talking about that. Oh, you killed my, do you think I'm taking prisoners because, you killed my husband? And my thought was no, he didn't. He committed suicide. So that was kind of what really annoyed me. But I think the mostly over here is that he just dies, and then Jean Grey goes, no! And we're back to control and stuff. But I actually thought the most about you over here because of Marvel Girl. Over there, and then I'm like, oh, Peter's not gonna like this. I actually kind of read it from is Peter liking this?
That's often how I read issues of, is Freya gonna enjoy this comic book issue? So, Zach, what did you think about this potential sad end for our characters here?
I think that, and I'm sure that you have more to say about this, I really do think that the depiction of Jean Grey here, and I'm not going to deign to call her Marvel Girl, even though the characters do, or at least one of the characters does, it's problematic. It is, if we are to presume that this is not a pod person, that this is the Jean Grey that we all know, or at least supposed to have the personality of the Jean Grey that we know, this is a personality that is much more prone to panic, much less capable, much less able to react in tense life or death situations than we have ever seen from this character. And it's a very weird way to depict her, I think, because this scenario harkens back specifically, and I would think pretty deliberately, to her most famous turn in the Dark Phoenix Saga, or not Dark Phoenix Saga, the Phoenix Saga.
Well, a couple of different points, honestly, in the whole thing.
I was thinking specifically of the Phoenix Saga, where she also has to face down seemingly certain death to get her team back from a space station in a spacecraft that's going to burn up in the atmosphere. And she knows that she's going to die doing that. But she is depicted there as having a completely level head, knowing that she's going to die, doing it anyway, and just understanding this is what responsibility means. This is what it is to be a hero. And we are seeing the very opposite of that here. She is effectively a damsel in distress, and it doesn't seem right. And I hope that there is a deliberate explanation for that, because otherwise I do think this depiction is troubling.
Tyler?
Yeah. I mean, on the topic of Jean, I mean, that's how I'm reading her. Like, she's a podsman. She's not the Jean that we know. I mean, you know, maybe Cyclops dying when she is telepathic, connected to him, is the first time she has someone died on her, as opposed to 616 Jean, who first manifests her power when Annie died in her head. So I think that's the reason why she's reacting this way. That's the reason why she's so unsure of herself, because she has not lived through all those character building moments, if you will, of the 616 Jean.
Yes, she hasn't she? Why would she not have?
Because she is not X-Men. She's grown.
Oh, if
from
she's
the
a
pods.
pod. Okay.
Yeah. So that's my assumption. And that's how I'm enjoying this issue, because I'm like, these are not the X-Men.
I think we have to say, though, that there are a lot of logic holes. If we're going with the pod person model, why on earth would Xavier send up an inexperienced child pod person without the mental capabilities of withstanding a high tension situation? It doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, even if we're assuming that that's...
Well, I mean, that's...
He needed a cell phone. That's
yeah.
why.
That's what I'm saying, because she's up here as the receiver, or the, you know, or you know, basically she's just the one, the end point of the other side of the communication. That's her role.
And this is where some of this pod stuff falls apart, because Cyclops ostensibly chose the team, and if Xavier's kind of seeding Utopia with like his favorite controllable version of each mutant at each stage in their lives, why would Cyclops pick her? Like, it starts to fall apart. And who knows? Like, Hickman's very deft at this stuff. Maybe there's going to be a really big reveal, but I think that I really came from a similar point of Zach, of like, it just wasn't Jean. Like, I think I've been saying all along, last issue I felt like Jean had a weird line that didn't really make sense for Jean. This issue at the beginning, I didn't really feel like Jean was herself. And here's where it really got hammered home for me, where she's like, what's our plan now? And Cyclops is dictating stuff, and she's like, what are we gonna do? She says, I just lost it, but she basically says drift through space. Like, Jean would never say that. Jean would be like, we're gonna slingshot around. Like, she's very tactical and she's very practical. And so this is the point where I've been like, she's in the mask, she's in the mini dress, she doesn't sound like Jean at all. And we just got Trinary at the beginning of the issue signaling us to X-Men Red probably happened. So are we supposed to read this as the X-Men Red Jean? Somebody online, and I can't remember who it was on Twitter, pointed out that when we saw initial pencils for the first issue of House of X, Jean's scene where she's bringing the kids to Utopia, she was in her X-Men Red look, the armored look, and they changed it to be the mini dress. So is the mini dress actually significant to the plot, or does Hickman just want it because it created the cool pop with the mask in the radio transmitter? And I don't know, but this is really where I got taken completely out of the issue for a number of reasons. Not only because I like Jean. Everybody has their one character that it's like a little electric shock when they're on the page and that they don't like when it gets wrong, and Jean is one of mine. I'm willing to put that out there. But bigger than that, we're seeing Hickman try to evoke emotion in us, in the reader, and for Xavier by killing all these characters, many of whom we know are going to come back, and for some like Jean, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and Wolverine that have just died recently. And this is why I kind of had that sociopathic laughing reaction, because like how else are you supposed to react to seeing Cyclops and Jean die again? Now, to be fair, it does reverse the Dark Phoenix thing a little bit, which I thought was what Zach was going to allude to, which is that Jean is the one who has to scream no while Cyclops gets killed by laser fire. But then Jean gets killed too. I don't know. I feel like it would have maybe like made me feel something a little bit more if the robots like hadn't broken into the pod and Jean would have floated away. Like that would have been like heavier for me, because I just believe that I don't trust Xavier and I don't think he's really feeling those emotions. But we'll get to that in our next go round. So Freya, so I'm going to put out there, this is where the issue fell apart for me. I kind of was like, this is stupid. I don't know if I want to keep reading. I don't really have an opinion. If you're on my Twitter, I went up and said, this issue wasn't for me, so I'm not going to review it. I think it was kind of just dumb.
So the thing is, like, you guys are all calling her Jean. I don't think this is Jean. I think this is like, this is not. That's why everyone keeps calling her Marvel Girl. And I think we as readers should as well. Because,
okay.
I feel like if you're calling her Jean, yeah, this is not Jean. I have very limited knowledge, and I'm on record saying I do not care for Jean all that much. Emma Frost all the way. But
Well, yeah.
Can I just ask, clarifying, what do you mean she's not Jean?
like the idea of like, that she's saying no, she's like always everything that you guys pointed out. Like, this is nothing about this. I'm like, this is not the Jean Grey I even know. So who is this character? This has to be some other character. Like Marvel Girl, I have no association with Marvel Girl. So I'm like, maybe it's at that point of her life. It's some pod person. It's some other reality. Jean, I don't know.
Well, but this Cyclops certainly does interact with her as if this is the Jean Grey that he has loved and been married to. I'm sorry, Jean, I'm not going to make it. I mean, that's Cyclops talking to his Jean Grey.
Right, which makes it seem like they're from like commensurate eras, but then Cyclops is clearly a more recent Cyclops, so that's where it starts to fall. I mean, who knows? Hickman might have a master plan, but I'm kind of submitting like, even if he does, I find this disinteresting.
Well, it's not really... Okay, the conversation between Jean and Cyclops is not really someone who has been together for a long time.
No?
No, I don't read it that way. And I mean, that's the thing. You either read it as Hickman writing them badly sometimes, or for Jean writing her badly all the time because he doesn't understand her, or like me in this issue, I read it as these are Poxmen instead of X-Men. And I kind of enjoyed it when it happened this way. Except when you come to the last panel, I'm like, what is this?
So yeah, we flash back to Earth and Xavier's very sad. And that's where we end. No more, he says. Or does he? Freya?
So I think that kind of what brings it all together, that no more, that's something that has been like, at the very beginning, he presents the data, how X-Men has been treated like shit all this time. And all of this happened, which kind of reintroduces the idea that how these characters are just recklessly killed off or just, deleted, like, not deleted, like killed off for people's enjoyment without so much of like a fanfare, like, so much of like respect, I guess is the term to use. And it happened again. And the way I read it is like his plan, he's crying not because he felt any emotional connection to this character, but because his plan failed. Like, because he's so attached, because Hickman is not capable of human emotion. I keep on pointing that out. And it's like that, because the number of times I cried because my plan failed at work, I connected with him on that level. To me, it was not because, these people died, but it's like, the plan didn't quite went as he wanted. And the whole no more, we are not sure who is saying these words. That's also something that I was like, this is not Xavier saying this. It's like, look at how this always ends. And, all of this, like, don't think this is Xavier's word, no more. It's someone else telling you this story and then telling you to kind of like, kind of
So
internalize.
that's a really interesting point, and it is that had occurred to me too. And I don't think I agree with your reading, but I think you make a really, really good point here, that the presumption here is that this entire monologue ending with this "no more," which is recited over and over again on this big, elaborate graphic that Hickman ends the issue with, the presumption is that this is a monologue being recited by Xavier. We don't know that for a fact, and it sounds like you and Peter may have theories as to who else that may be from.
But, okay, just to throw a wrench into this whole thing, it was quoted as Professor X saying this right at the beginning of this issue.
This is a good point, and this is why I do assume that it is Professor X.
No. Professor X may have said that at another point. That all of the monologue may not be from Professor X. So, maybe this is Professor X took it from there, and then,
I don't know. I think we do need to take a little bit of an Occam's razor approach to this and say that that's overcomplicating it without a lot of evidence to say that we should be overcomplicating it. If the quote is attributed to Professor X, and if we see this phrase over Professor X's face crying a single tear at the end of all of his X-Men dying, I think there's an obvious interpretation that Hickman wants us to reach, and we have to work not to reach it.
The reason I was saying that, because this sounded very much like Magneto. These are the shit that Magneto says.
What it sounds like, I would like to venture, is Wanda Maximoff. I think that, especially because we opened with this very clear reference to her on that chart, this seems pretty obviously to be evoking Wanda's famous "No More Mutants." I don't think that's an accident, because that's opening and closing this issue.
Yeah, so I think my thoughts on this is actually a synthesis of a lot of what you've said, and it's not as simple as me disagreeing with Zach earlier. I think the "no more" is meant to be a theme that's echoing across a couple of different characters and times, and it changes the way that we're encountering the monologue versus the charts at the end versus the quote page at the beginning. Do I think Xavier has said "no more"? Yes. Do I think this is the scene where that quote of him saying "no more" is taken from? Not necessarily. I think it is meant to reflect no more mutants. He or whoever is saying it is just saying no more of any of this. The monologue at the end to me reads very much as Moira, having experienced the death and fire in all of her lives, starting from the plane crash, and realizing that she's in this inescapable cycle, and she's trying to break the rules. This feels like, to me, a monologue that Moira gives to Xavier on the bench. That to me is how I read it, and that Xavier takes her "no more" as his sort of rallying cry. Maybe he's sad for a number of reasons. Did the real X-Men die and he's got backups waiting in pods? Did the pod X-Men die and he's got the real ones waiting? Or has he not even done the pod technology yet? We don't know where the characterization of the single tear comes from. But either way, he did just experience their psychic deaths. And I think that explains the tear. And I see this as him having the rallying cry that him and Moira have had since the bench, which is that "no more, we're putting an end to this." I think it could be a cry of success rather than failure, quite honestly.
As far as attributing that monologue, I would like to both agree and disagree with you at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
My seeming disagreement is to say that what I think this could well be from is the same attribution that we saw from Xavier's quote at the very first House of X issue, which we were told in the script came from his psychic speech to all mankind. I think this is also exerted from Xavier's speech to mankind, where he said, "While you slept, the world changed." This is him showing them exactly how the world has changed. Or is it him? Because I would also point out that we're only hearing that character referred to as Professor X in regards to that speech, and maybe that's Professor Moira X. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I don't know, I guess to me, like, the story, even though Xavier's been driving it so much in the present day, it doesn't feel like Xavier's story to me. Like, he's a pawn of Moira. Like, they hatched this plan on the bench. We haven't seen her hand acting, but we did get that infographic last issue that says Moira and Professor X established this sleeping giant program. And I guess it's just hard for me, especially because I've been reading a lot of the chart pages as Mora. It's hard for me to attribute this end explosion of chart pages as Xavier. This is Mora making her final play. She doesn't know if she's going to make it to Life 11. This is her last chance at trying to fix things. She doesn't know if she's really sacrificed all the X-Men for good or not. She just doesn't know how it's going to turn out, because unless it happened in Life 6, she has no information that tells her how this is all going to turn out. So I don't know. Like, I see him as a much more secondary character to the unseen hand of Mora X looming above us here.
I think that that's a very strong point. And I think that as this story plays out, we may be seeing that attempting to differentiate Charles Xavier from Mora from Professor X is a bit of a moot point. We don't know how in control this character is of his, her, their own actions. We've only seen this character with that Cerebro helmet on. I'm not going to say for certain that this Professor X that we've been looking at is not, in some fashion, the consciousness of Moira MacTaggert.
But what if it's been Mora all along?
Not out of the question, is it?
Yeah, Sinister plays her there. But my question is more like, are these last 3 pages the normal data pages that you're looking at? Because it's definitely not done that way.
With the everything being exploded and all
and also with
misspellings.
And with the the 4 corners where they have all the indexing and things like that. So these 3 pages doesn't seem to me like they are data pages.
No, they're not. Are they supposed to be data pages?
No, they certainly look just sort of like Banksy-esque graphic design.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me to express outrage and strong emotion, which is why I do think that Professor X's reaction to what's happened to the X-Men here is really supposed to be genuine, because I think that this graphic design is Hickman's depiction of somebody just being absolutely emotionally and philosophically wrecked by what they've just seen. Not just the death of these characters, but what it represents, which is no matter what mutants do, no matter what they try to be, no matter what tactic they take, this is what keeps happening to them. This is what the humans do. They keep othering them, they keep killing them, and they keep not caring no more.
Yeah, the 3 pages, well, we call it 3 pages, but there's just really just one continuous piece broken up into 3 different pages.
I don't know. He just won. He sat, when you play chess, you sacrifice pieces. It's really hard for me to see Xavier as anything but a successful Xavier hero. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way that I always read Xavier, because I just don't trust him anymore. But it just feels very, I don't know. I guess we'll find out in the next couple of issues, because it's really hard for me to read it that way.
It also kind of looked like rallying cry, like a posters for the mutant kind to kind of rally behind,
Yeah, it almost looks like the Magneto is right shirt in a way.
It does. It's agitprop. It's designed like political agitprop, as was that chart at the very beginning. And I don't.
The erasure, the pretender. It's
I think that's all very deliberate. This is supposed to be like a political rallying cry.
Right. I don't know. To me, I think it got because I've been saying the same, no more of mutants just being decimated, no more of this. To me, I think it got that emotion right, and I was presented with data, then I was shown how they had one more try and that didn't go through, and then they were kind of killed the same way, and now whoever it is saying no more, it's now I'm ready to see what that means. What does that mean? What you're gonna do with that no more? How are you going to now transfer that? What are you gonna do with it? That's what I want to know now.
I think you're spot on with that. And I think that this is another one of those act breaks that Hickman seems to be periodically giving us in this story. I think that this is where we see how is this big plan to break the cycle going to play out, because this is the emotional moment when he finally declares the cycle is broken, no more. Let's see what that means.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's in a very figurative, metaphorical way. I feel like it also feels like everything that you know about, all the things that happened to X-Men prior to this are done. This is the closing chapter, and now something new is going to begin. It kind of feels like that. Why is it at 7th issue? I can't tell you that.
Well, I
I
mean,
can't.
the one thing that is, I'm just going off tangent here, that sort of strikes me here is that both sides are kind of radicalized. Both sides are willing to die for their cause. So, I mean, obviously we are meant to feel like, the mutants are the heroes, the humans are in the story are the evil ones. But is that right?
Well, I mean, the machines would say no. I don't know that Hickman is deliberately coming into this trying to say, like, bad people on both sides. I don't think that that's the intention of this story, and I'm not sure that it would be totally justifiable to do that. I do think that he's trying to at least give a rationale for every faction that we've seen. And as far as the Mothermold was concerned, humans and mutants are both just decadent gods warring over each other for no good reason. But I think that this issue is certainly presenting the mutant case, which, from everything we've seen, is a strong case.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
And to that point, and this is where I'm going to go supernova political over here. If KKK people says this thing that we are scared that we're being erased, I don't think I'll have any sympathy for them. Like, I won't have any, and the humans over here are kind of presented that way, especially not here, but humans in anytime anti-mutant humans are most of the time are kind of presented that way, that they're scared that the mutants are going to erase them. Instead of trying to coexist with them, they're like, oh no, we should erase the mutants. That's how they are often. They're all the mutant enemies humans are all portrayed that way. So, I mean, am I supposed to care for them? Is like, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't. Like, I don't have any feelings for them.
No, I know what you mean.
What do you think,
humans,
Peter?
I think the humans are not made out to be particularly sympathetic here. It's been very easy to not side with them. It's certainly deliberate. He could have written a more sympathetic human race if he wanted to. If anything, the machines come off kind of sympathetic here to me. I mean, especially, I know Zach didn't get into Mythology Corner, but if you think about who the Titans are and the reference that Zach knows this way, way better than I do, but I do read a lot of mythology. Like, the Titans, are put aside for the Pantheon and then ultimately put aside for man. And the Sentinels basically saying, like, they're just the first powerful race and they've made mistakes and we need to set them aside. Yeah. And I think that's just as valid as a position as the mutants' position, but that's coming from the machine, not from humanity, because humanity in that instance is also one of the people being left behind.
Right.
Yeah, humanity is nothing more than an outdated generation trying to hold on to power that they never really earned in the first place and certainly didn't deserve.
Yeah.
That's right.
So where do we wind up here? Where are we standing, us Hickman, for at the end of this 7th of 12 issues?
So let's do a lightning round final reaction. Like, do we want to do that very quickly? Zach?
Well, for all of my analysis, and I will say that I have a lot of fun with this analysis, my assessment is not bullish at the midway mark. I was particularly unenthused about this issue. I did not really like the last issue either. But, I said before when we did our midterm evaluations that I feel that ultimately what Hickman has here is a mystery that gets a little bit less intriguing with each passing issue. And he's not giving us a lot of deep characterization or emotional hooks to hang it on. I don't think he really cares about the emotion of these characters. I think he cares about the big plot that he's setting up. And if all the plot has left is people wondering what the next big twist is going to be, I don't think that that's promising. It's certainly not promising to me. It's not the kind of story that I can get particularly emotionally invested in. So I love discussing this. I love digging into it. I love finding the themes that it's working with. But as far as a story goes that I think is a good X-Men story, I don't think it's succeeding at this point.
Tyler?
See, that's the reason why I'm enjoying this, because I'm not viewing this as a typical X-Men story. The typical X-Men story is going to come with the Dawn of X. So this is setting the stage. This is like making it so that Dawn of X make sense in this world. And I think that's where the real story will happen. So this and with this, and with my assumption that these are not the real X-Men, I really enjoy this issue. I mean, there are some good WTF moments, and there are some one really bad WTF moments. So, but overall, I kind of like this issue a little bit more than the previous two issues.
Peter.
Well, I think, as I've mentioned a few times, I think Hickman put himself in a strange corner in this issue where if we were to take all the deaths literally, we would feel a certain way, but we can't because we've seen the solicits and he can't help that. That's just the way the comic industry works. Mm-hmm. But we know that some of these deaths are not real, as many of the deaths in Rosenberg's run weren't. But we didn't know that at the time, and a lot of people reacted very negatively to Rosenberg's run because he was killing people off left and right. So if we didn't have that foreknowledge, would we still dislike this issue, or would our reactions to this issue be different? I don't know. But the corner I think he's painted himself into is either we take the deaths literally because they're really going to matter in terms of the story, because those characters are really gone in terms of the story, even if they're back to Dawn of X, or we're meant to take them totally not literally because the next scene is the pod scene from issue 1. They all pop out of their pods and everybody's fine. But either way, it makes it feel like there's just like not a lot of weight to this comic book. Like I don't really get it. I don't really understand why we're reading it or paying money for it or reading it weekly or having a show about it. Like I really feel unmoored after this issue. But what I would say is that, I introduced myself as this X-Men fan, but I'm a fan of the entire arc of X-Men and all this X-Men behind me. And I have not really enjoyed X-Men since like 2011. I've pretty much disliked every main X-Men book since 2011, like clockwork. And so part A is like, well, does that just mean I'm not really into what X-Men is anymore? Totally possible. I don't want to be one of those Spider-Man fans who went on saying how bad Dan Slott was. Oh God, I said his name. Don't say it 2 more times because he's like Beetlejuice. But I'm not going to be one of those fans who's like saying how terrible the run is for 8 years running. Yet here I am. I've been saying this X-Men run is terrible for 8 years running. But what that brings me to is maybe this isn't a beginning. Maybe this is X-Men, the coda on that X-Men. Maybe this is Hickman divorcing us from that. Like Tyler said, in Dawn of X is going to be the new X-Men. And so by the virtue of how much I've disliked X-Men for 8 years, maybe I'm supposed to dislike this. Maybe this is the pinnacle of my dislike, the apex, or the nadir, depending on how we think about it. And maybe Dawn of X is going to be totally fresh. So the place where I currently stand, I know this wasn't lightning round, but it's kind of been, I want to contextualize a lot of my grouchiness from this episode, is I kind of am over HiX-Box at this point. Like things are going to happen. We're going to evaluate it. It's going to be fun because I like you guys and I like charts. But this doesn't change my optimism about Dawn of X. I just am feeling a little bit down on HiX-Box.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for all of that. So for me, I think I am finally kind of getting the whole no more, that kind of brought it all home to me. And I'm kind of thinking that I'm excited now to see what you do with the no more, because no more is also the same thing I've also said.
It is.
The very first, I think I have it screenshotted somewhere. I can think I'm like, no more of X-Men moping. No more of X-Men being the victim. No more of any of that. I don't want that. I don't care for that. I want them to be the prime that they should be. Looks like Hickman's also on the same page with me, but still my question remains how this no more is going to play out. That I need to know. I need to know that before I can make a judgment. Whether that, and I'm knowing Hickman's long run, not long play, there's no way it's going to be in this 12 issue. It's going to just set the scene. And then maybe within first arc of Dawn of X, I think we would probably figure that out. And maybe it's just going to be the whole 3 years we have to wait before we kind of know what he is talking about. I don't know. But it's still keeping me excited. It's still keeping me going. And obviously, I love coming here, listening to Zach's biblical corner or mythological corner, or philosophical corner, as it was.
I wear many hats.
Many hats. Peter Sassidas, Tyler's keeping us calm and on point. I love this so much. So it's giving me a lot of joy. And to me, without HiX-Box, would we have come together? So, from that point of view, I think I'm still hopeful, and I'm looking forward to. But hey, if this no more turns out to be like some weird bullshit, hell hath no
She will
fury.
turn on you. She will snap.
I will come and find you, Mr. Hickman. So be ready for that. All right. Okay. So Peter, are you ready to kind of? This was a long episode, everyone. And you know, we're sorry, but there was a lot to talk about. Apparently, do subscribe. We're gonna be back next week with Powers of 10. Correct? Powers of 10 4. Yes.
Yeah.
So and you know
something sinister.
Ooh.
Might answer a lot of our questions.
Right, you know. So, and we know that X2 is gone, right? Like, you know, that has been excised. Like, you know, that ended. So we don't know where.
Yep, we don't know where.
Yeah, we don't know where it's gonna leave us. So, hey, come back next week. And we're gonna be right here in Fangirlz Assemble, and also subscribe and do all of that jazz. Our midterm evaluation is up also as well. Take a look at that, and then when we do our full term, let's see how we have changed or we didn't. So, Peter, bring us home.
Before I do, I just want to point out, I do have to disassemble all of House of Crisis here over the next 3 weeks and get moved to somewhere else. So if I do wind up not appearing, it's not because I've rage quit as a result of the comments you've seen me made here. I will be in a moving van. So just if I don't appear next week, I've not been killed off camera. Just know that. So here we go. Hold on. I got to put up the slide. Share screen. This is so anticlimactic. Okay, here we go.
Goodbye, everyone.